Yes, Miss Burdick. That's correct, Miss Burdick. No, Miss Burdick. Good morning, Miss Burdick, and welcome to True Crime Loser. Good morning, everybody, and how are ya? Woo! We're back. Hope you're doing well, and today we are going over Scott Nelson's testimony. He's taken the stand. I said yesterday that he was a little bit below average IQ. I, for some reason, thought average was like 85 to 100, and so I thought he was like on the low end of the average. But turns out the average in America is 98, so he's pretty much a dumbass. So there you go. All right. First thing, the judge goes, all right, Nelson, for almost 10 minutes, he goes, Nelson, are you sure you want to do this? Because if the jury sees your personality, they'll probably sentence you to death. But Nelson doesn't have anything to lose. He's a felon with a poop bag. He wants to be put to death. He wants to go back to jail. He has spent 25 years in prison, and so for someone like that, just to be out and wearing a suit and have someone ask you questions is probably pretty fun compared to, he knows after this it's just back to the concrete shitbox, and so this is the time to say his piece. He's thought about what he's going to say in this thing for years, and they let him rock. I give him credit because they don't shut him up. So the judge is essentially saying, are you sure you want to come up here? Because, and he's like, yes, I do. And they're like, all right. And then they come up, and someone that's watched the whole trial, what's with the chair? He gets up there and they're like, all right, make sure that you can sit down without making a sound. And he's like, yeah, I am conscious of that. And then he like sits in the chair and it doesn't squeak or anything. And the judge is like, okay, yeah, did you hear anything? I didn't hear it. You guys? No? All right. Well, that worked. And it's just funny. Here's a guy, a multiple felon murderer, and there's something absurd of just being like, make sure you can sit down without making the chair squeak. Priorities. Okay. So after a long, dude, you gotta be sure. He's like, I'm gonna do it. So they bring him up. They swear him in. The jury comes in, and it is just off to the races. Usually they'll warm you up a little bit, start out with some just kind of boring questions, and then get into it. This one, his lawyer comes up and goes, who is Julio Dominguez? And he goes, Julio is a parole officer. And they're like, how did Julio Dominguez, how is he a part of this case? And he goes, well, if not for Julio Dominguez, Jennifer Fulford would be alive. And it's just like, all right, here we go. Not wasting any time. And then his lawyer goes, how many felonies do you have? And Nelson goes, 6. And then his lawyer goes, I have no further questions. That's just funny to me that a lawyer's like, how many felonies do you have? 6. No further questions. That's my point. Okay. So Scott wanted this whole thing, wanted to come up here. Oh yeah, his quote, he goes, it's because of him that Jennifer is dead. And then he says, where is it? Oh yeah, he goes, it's justice. The truth should be known, sir. And so that's his the whole defenses shot. And so Scott's only goal is to get up here and just tell the world this was Julio's fault. This wasn't my fault. He screwed me over, which we'll talk about, but it doesn't really look like he did. He screwed me over, and I just want it out there. You know, Jennifer's family is in the courtroom, so I think he just wanted to say this was his fault. But he also has to go through cross-examination, which is a lawyer named Miss Burdick. And she was a prosecutor in the Casey Anthony trial. It almost looks like the same courtroom. And I was laughing last night because he's blaming it on Julio Dominguez, and if she would have gotten up and was like, so it was Julio Dominguez's fault, and if he would have just gone, no, it was Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, and then she just has like a flashback, like, no, not Zenaida, and then she wakes up, and it's the day before she has to cross-examine Scott Nelson, and she's like, oh my God, Zenaida. It's just Julio Dominguez. It's not Zenaida Gonzalez. Meanwhile, none of the Mexicans are mad at Scott Nelson in the prison for some reason. Okay, so Miss Burdick. Scott Nelson goes, yes, Miss Burdick. That is correct, Miss Burdick. No, Miss Burdick. So Miss Burdick gets up, and her main goal throughout this whole thing is slowly and surely point out that it doesn't really make logistical sense that even if it is true that this parole guy got you fired, got you kicked out on the street, and then a month went by, and then you killed a nice lady. Okay, that's the jump, okay? You were mad at this guy and that guy and the whole, like, system in the world because of the, you know, the whole poop bag, felon, the whole thing. You're mad at these two. But then you killed a nice lady. You killed a real nice lady that had nothing to do with it. So the prosecution is going to make sure the jury knows, okay, this isn't some guy that was going for truth and justice and did something in the heat of the moment, temporarily, just insane because this guy ruined his life. It was a guy that got really mad and then really for no reason killed a nice lady. So that is her goal through the whole thing. And we know that Scott Nelson's goal is to blame it on Julio Dominguez. That's all he's up there. Okay? So Miss Burdick. Miss Burdick gets up there. And he's talking about, she's asking him questions at first to be like, how'd you get so mad? And he is saying, you know, I got thrown out on the street, blah, blah, blah. As people pointed out in yesterday's video, it's only according to him that the parole officer came and was like, you're crazy for not letting this guy work here. Get him out of here. That's only according to Scott. The employer testified, he goes, yeah, we had agreed that he could stay at my spot for a little bit while he got on his feet and he got a couple paychecks. And the parolee guy came and we talked, and then Scott didn't show up. He quit coming. And so I think in Nelson's head, he's like, I was screwed over by the parole, but at least according to their testimony, he was like, nah, he got a couple paychecks and then just booted. Not our fault. So he's saying, I got thrown on the street for the third or fourth time, and there's no point to get another job because the system that has it after me is just going to ruin that one. So he pretty much said that Julio Dominguez lit a time bomb. He lit a firecracker, And it's their fault. It's not my fault for wandering around and then killing a nice lady. It's their fault. It's not my fault. And so Miss Burdick says, okay, so he's saying, I'm thrown out on the street. I was starving. I was totally assed out. And so she goes, well, you had a bank account, right? He goes, yeah, I started it with the money from the check or two that I got. And she goes, okay, there's about $500 in the bank account, right? And he goes, yeah. And so she's saying, like, why didn't you just go buy food? She's like, you went to Walmart, right? And he goes, yeah. And she goes, you bought blue shoes, zip ties, duct tape, a lot of cigarettes, a knife. He goes, I sure did. And here's the points where you really can't feel bad for him, because Jennifer's family is sitting in there. There's no reason to say, did you buy a knife? And he goes, sure did. I sure did. I bought one. And you get to see a little about how he thinks he ended up in this whole thing. He says, you kick a dog enough times, before long, they bite back. And it's like, yes, Nelson, but usually they bite who was kicking them. Or, maybe not, but it would make sense to bite you. That's a nice lady over there. And they go through how he even picked that house with the nanny, and it's pretty terrifying. So the employer had brought him over to paint this house, and the owner of that house was talking that he had some sort of beef or lawsuit or something with the house that he ended up invading, and it had come up that they were rich and had a bunch of money. So he's thinking possibly, okay, this is the house. I'll go in, get a bunch of money, and then just go out on the run. And like I said, Miss Burdick is doing a really good job of just being like, this wasn't even connected. It was a month later, after you talked to Julio Dominguez and all that, all of that situation. It was a month later, you were wandering the streets, and you ended up at this house. And he was like, I think what you would call her is collateral damage. And I was hoping someone would be like, well, all the shit that you're complaining about, let's just call you collateral damage too. That was easy, right? Yeah, we don't feel bad about all that prison stuff, poop bag, everything you went through. It's just collateral damage. Sorry, man. So it goes both ways. So he's like, yep, collateral damage. I was a firecracker. I was a dog that's been kicked. I was going to kill Julio Dominguez, but a month later, I went after this old lady. And about 41 minutes into this thing, it starts to take a turn. And Miss Burdick is, again, just slowly and calmly making the point that instead of taking it out on the two people that you feel wronged you, you went for a course that wasn't normal. Instead of going for a normal course, you decided to do something completely different. And Scott goes, he's getting ready to do one of his long answers, and he goes, ma'am. And she cuts him off as he says, ma'am. He goes, ma'am. She cuts him off and goes, yes or no. And you can see his face get a little red, and he's getting over it. And he says something like, yes, saying yes or no answers to something like this is really putting a gag in my mouth. But I'll play along. Yes. And then she goes, why not just go after Dominguez? And he goes, well, funny you should ask. I was going to. I was going to shoot him. There's just something funny about somebody usually on the stand is doing everything they can not to incriminate themselves. They're trying to look like a normal, hi, I just am a normal person that shouldn't be in jail. But he doesn't, he wants to be put to death and wants to go back to jail. So it's like, yeah, why didn't you go after Dominguez? Well, I was going to shoot him too. I'm like, oh, all right. And by the grace of God, he was saved. And then it starts to get a little bit, they take a little huddle up, all the lawyers go up to the judge, and they're all talking, and then it comes out of the huddle, and Miss Burdick goes, do you remember the question? And Scott goes, no. And she's making the point that she's still making the point that if you went and bought zip ties and duct tape other than food, it's not a survival thing. It wasn't a revenge thing. It was a month later. And she's like, you went and bought zip ties. Do you remember the zip ties? And Nelson goes, yep. Never leave home without them. And Miss Burdick goes, thank you for that quote. And Nelson goes, levity. But again, the family's in there, and you're sitting there going, never leave home without them. Levity. And she goes, you were walking around looking for targets. And he goes, yes. And she goes, how did you end up there at that house? And he goes, luck of the draw. And again, he seems to think that all the bad stuff that happens to him, maybe it was luck of the draw too. You seem to blame all these other people, but when it comes to the thing that happened to poor Jennifer, you're just like, sorry, luck of the draw. And then she's saying, she's trying to show the jury like he really had no business being in this part of town. But none of this stuff is really working because he's like, I'll admit to it. Why are you grilling me with? So she's like, there was no real point for you to be in Winter Park, right? You don't work there, live there. And he's like, I have to be somewhere, Miss Burdick. I have to be somewhere. And then she's still, doing her job. And he goes, the longer we do this Q&A, we're getting farther and farther. And she cuts him off and goes, refusing to answer. And he goes, I don't even know what you're asking me, Miss Burdick. And then she goes, how did you pick a random, you're just walking around carrying zip ties and duct tape and a knife? And he goes, no, I was in the bushes. I wasn't carrying it around. It's not a good look to walk around the street looking like Rambo. And she brings up his confession with the cops, and he sets up this whole thing about how he just, after a while, wanted to see the cops squirm, so he was trying to say anything he could possibly to get them to squirm. And a lot of it wasn't even true. And he has a quote that describes interrogations pretty well. He goes, that's how detectives are. They squeeze you, and then ba-boom, you get nothing in the end. That's what they're good at. It's like, yeah, that is pretty good. Ba-boom, nothing in the end. And then, he's kind of driving it off with, I'm being treated awfully by the detectives. And then Miss Burdick goes, let's get back to why you killed Jen. And he goes, Julio Dominguez. And she goes, no, we're past that. And again, you can see on his face, it just turns red. He's like, I'm not past that. And she goes, let's get back to September 26th, which is a good strategy for the jury and to quell to quell what he's doing, how he's just like, it was Julio Dominguez and I had to do it because, and she, by saying, let's go back to September 26th when it happened, what that's doing is he hadn't seen Julio Dominguez for a month. He hadn't worked. He had just been wandering around. He had a little bit of money. He had wandering around with his duct tape and zip ties, stashing them in bushes. So just showing that it's not really connected to Julio Dominguez. So she goes, let's get back, to September 26th. You're on foot. And he goes, yeah. You have duct tape. You have zip ties. And he interrupts her and goes, what does this have to do with Julio Dominguez? Or Zenaida? No. What does this have to do? If you're going to grill me for 3 hours, I'm not doing it. I came here for one reason, and that was Julio Dominguez. And then she goes, and this is where it just goes completely nuts. She goes, court, please make him answer. She asked the court, he's not answering. Please make him answer the question. And Nelson goes, my memory's getting real foggy. I think I need my medication. I think I'm going to start using that line too, just if someone's talking to me for too long, just being like, whoop, dang, my memory's getting real foggy, need my medications. My memory's getting real foggy, everybody. And after this, it just goes nuts. So I'm going to cut it off right there. Pretty sure I'll have time tomorrow to do one more episode, but if not, we'll pick it up next week. But like I said, I'm pretty sure I will see you tomorrow. Why, Stavin, why? Shamita.